Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Vicky Waco, and on this channel we focus on having the most productive life with the least amount of stress. But today I'm going to talk about something a little bit different, which is about grief and how to help children through grief, and my personal experience of being someone who lost a mom very young, and things that I felt helped me and things I wished those around me would have known when I was going through that. So let's get into it. Alright, so let's get into it. I lost my mom when I was 10 years old. I've done a couple different videos about how I lost my mom, the situation around losing my mom, and I'll do a couple more videos just explaining it because it's a really hard situation. But I believe anytime a child loses a parent or someone they love, a friend, grief is really hard. And one of the things that I believe is hardest about it is that grief is not linear. And that's the first thing I always like people to know. Grief is not linear. I tell this to the families I work with who are going through horrible situations. I tell this to friends as they are dealing with things. But I think so often we want a really nice beginning, middle, end to everything in life. And grief is just not one of those things. You will go through parts of the grief over and over again. They will creep back up. And I definitely learned that through personal experiences, that I felt like, for the first 2 years, I want to say, after my mom died, I was actually in therapy. And by the end, I felt like, okay, like even as a 12-year-old, I should have this. And then as I got a little bit older, there were things that made me grieve again. When you lose a parent young, you grieve the fact that they're not there to help you pick out your prom dress. I'm a girl, so, but they are not there for your graduations. They're not there when you get married. Someday my mom won't be there when I have a child, if I'm so lucky to have a child. And those are things you're going to grieve. So I think it's really important, especially with kids, to never make them feel like there's a right way or wrong way. Just meeting them where they are and recognizing that they might go back to that same spot over and over again. One of the other things too I think is really important, something that I wish my caregivers would put more thought into, is that everyone is grieving, right? So when I lost my mom, it wasn't just me grieving, it was my family around me, her friends around me, who were also grieving the loss of that person who was important to them. So I think having your own time to grieve is really important away from the child, because you can't put your grief on a child, right? Like, that's just, I feel like that should be pretty obvious, honestly. But it's just so easy to that grief to compound on each other. So I think it's really important for adults with a child who's grieving to have healthy outlets and healthy places to go with their grief. Because you're no good to the child unless you're dealing with your stuff. I mean, that's just basic. So those are my two first things. Recognize that grief has no one-way pattern, no timetable. It is something that the child will live with for a very long time and might revisit, and normalizing that for them. And also dealing with your own grief and recognizing that you, as the helper, need your own help. So I think those are two really, really key things. Some of the things that I can tell you personally I experienced, which are very common to grief, is the fact that I was angry a lot. I went through a really long period of being angry, and the anger really turned inward and became very unhealthy, and I unfortunately found very unhealthy outlets as a teenager to deal with that anger. And maybe I'll do a whole video about this, but I struggled with eating disorders, and also with depression and attempted suicide when I was a teenager, because there was so much anger in me that I wasn't finding a positive outlet for, that it just was consuming me and eating away at me. And once I did find those proper outlets and got the help I needed, I was really able to deal with that anger. And one of the other things, of course, is finding other people that the child can talk to who maybe have been through similar experiences. One of the hardest parts for me was I grew up in a small town. I was the only person I knew who ever lost a parent. And to compound that, I lost my mom in a very, a way that you wouldn't imagine. Like, on top of the fact that my mom was gone because she was murdered and we had no answers, right? So I think one of the things that was so helpful to me, and this is going to sound completely silly, but I just want you to show how the simplest things can truly help, was I actually started to watch a TV show, and the character was actually like 18 in it, but she had just lost her mom, and she actually lost her mom to cancer, but that didn't matter to me as much as this is another person who is going through this too. And that gave me, as silly as it sounds, such comfort in the fact that I wasn't alone, that I wasn't the only person, because it felt like I was the only person who ever had to go through this. So even finding books maybe of historical people who have gone through losses for your child to read, obviously age appropriate stories, but that sense of you're not alone, that other people have walked this journey before you, and you can make it through too, because they did. Because I think the hopelessness in grief can really, really overwhelm a child. And something I always like to remind people is, for a child, the first time they ever experience something is the first time. They have no point of reference to compare it to, right? So like as an adult now, as I grieve the loss of someone, I have the mental bank of memories and experiences to go back on and say, this is gonna suck, yes. This is gonna take a long time, yes. But I've been through this before, and I have a mental map of how to do this. Kids don't have that. I didn't have that as a 10-year-old who was still in the process. When I lost my mom, I was actually still grieving the loss of my brother who had died 3 years before, which is a whole nother video. But, so like compounding loss with no real experience to say, hey, you're going to get through this, because I hadn't yet. So I think that's so important to have those role models, and maybe it's even you sharing your personal story, right, about how you got through it. And that's one of the things I'm really proud of. I did get through it, and it was really hard. And if you're a parent watching a child go through this, I can only imagine how heart-wrenching it is. But recognize that they can get through it. You can get through it, and you're going to get through it because you have healthy outlets, because you're recognizing that grief is not a one-way street and it's not a straight path. You're going to use your mental models to help your child see, hey, I've been here before and this is how we get through it, and finding those role models for your child to see that also. And finally, by just being kind through the experience and recognizing that there are boundaries, there are expectations, obviously always in life, but that this is a time to be kind and recognize that anger a lot of times is covering up sadness, that sadness might be covered up by happiness. Kids are really good at playing the roles that we want them to play, so they might really seem happy, and underneath they maybe aren't happy, and you have to kind of just make safe spaces for them to be able to share that when they are able to and when they feel ready to. Because that's the other thing. This is not ever about forcing someone through a process. This is about walking with someone on a lifelong journey. And that's what grief is, especially when you lose a key person in your life very young. So those are my tips from what I experienced going through loss and losing my mom. If this was helpful to you, give it a thumbs up. Comment below questions you might have. I'm happy to share more about my personal experiences if it can help anyone who's going through what I went through. Especially with the holidays coming up, it can be a really hard time for people in grief. So just be kind and take the time now to give yourself the breaks and get the energy you need to help the ones you love through the difficult times. So thanks so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. Thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to see more. And I'll see you all next time. Bye.